Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to listen today. I'm particularly excited to be here, partly because I got to speak a little bit last year at the Summerhill Festival. And also, as I understand it, Henry, this is a partnership as well with IDEC this year as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which is really exciting because last year when I spoke at IDEC, I cried for the entire hour. So I am excited to have an opportunity to redeem myself and not cry at a room full of people. So thank you for having me back. So my name is Kate Robinson, and I am the director and co-founder of a number of initiatives that are dedicated to my father, who was Sir Ken Robinson. So for those of you who don't know, he was an incredible speaker and an educator. And my husband and I had the pleasure through our company Nevergrey of working with him for the past several years. And now that he has passed away, we're completely dedicated. Everything we do is dedicated to continuing his work. So it's in part his legacy and about him, and a lot is just keeping talking about everything that we've always talked about. So before I worked with Dad, I used to be involved in running a project called 100, that I assume many of you know, which at the time was which was looking at the next 100 years of education from Finland's perspective, and now is kind of this amazing curated list of education innovations that is published every year. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is about how I believe that we have a commitment to create a future that is suitable for all of us, to create a future for us all. And the way that I think we're going to do that is through imagination, and in particular, wait, I swapped my PowerPoint. Ta-da! In particular, through two words which have endless possibilities, and they are Imagine If. So we named our not-for-profit Imagine If, and we've got an annual festival that happens every year in March, which coincides with my dad's birthday. By the way, I call him SKR in a professional context, so I don't have to keep saying my dad or Ken, neither of which feel right in this kind of a setting. So SKR. So it's for his birthday, but it's also an annual festival of human potential, and to come together to celebrate the diversity of talents and abilities and passions that we all have that make us as a species so incredible. And we've called it Imagine If because I truly believe that the future lies in those two words. Our history up to this point has been encompassed in people saying Imagine If and then creating it. The reason imagination is key to creating our future is because fundamentally it's what separates us out from the rest of life on Earth. Other creatures may well have capacities for imagination, but certainly none of them can make use of their imagination in the same way that we have been able to. And there's a beautiful quote by David Attenborough. Oh, hang on, I'm back on that one. There we are. There's a beautiful quote by David Attenborough, which I'll read out in case you can't see the slides because they're so tiny, which is, he's talking about, I don't know if any of you have seen his documentary in his last book, which is A Life on This Planet, which is his witness statement of sort of the environmental crisis over the course of his lifetime. But what I love about the book is that he's wrapped into it all this hope that it's not sort of a doom and gloom, we are destroying the environment, but it's very much, and this is what we can do about it. So he's talking about all the tools we have in our repertoire to help stop the climate crisis, or at least to slow it down and reverse it. And this is the quote that he says at the end. He says, "We have one more thing, an ability, perhaps unique among the living creatures on the planet, to imagine a future and to work towards achieving it." Which echoes so much of everything that we talk about. So when I saw that on the documentary, I think I screamed, just because it's Sir David Attenborough. But because we have this incredible capacity for imagination, he's absolutely right. We don't live in the world the way other creatures do. We create the worlds in which we live. The physical world as we know it, and our cultures and our societies are as much created out of our minds as they are from what we have inherited in a natural sense. So there are different ways, a little bit about imagination. There are different ways that we can use our powers of imagination. So we can be imaginal, which is the ability to bring to mind images that are drawn from real experiences. So you can picture your mother's hair, or what you had for dinner last night, or where you went on holiday recently. So that's being imaginal. You can be imaginative, which is the ability to bring to mind images of things that you've never experienced, like a purple donkey, or what it feels like to walk on the moon for most of us that we've never experienced, or what you might do in the future, where your next holiday might be. And then you can have imaginary experiences, so confusing imaginative experiences with real ones, which can happen, you know, in a really vivid dream and a hallucination if you've, you know, if you're on mind-altering substances, if you've experienced any form of post-traumatic stress, it's one of the common side effects. But so we have these incredible abilities. So through imagination, you can look into the past, you can look into the future. It also allows us to be compassionate and to have empathy because you can imagine what someone else is experiencing. The other thing to say about it, and this I find fascinating, is that we don't all have the same capacities for imagination. So I learned this from an amazing man called Dr. Amir Ahmedi, who, through his research, so a little bit about him, but his work involves teaching people who are congenitively blind to see. So people who've been blind from birth, he helps them to see through vibrations. So in the same way that an ultrasound takes sound vibrations and converts them to images, he takes images and converts them into sound vibrations so that somebody who's never seen before can pick out the one green apple from a bowl of otherwise red apples, which is pretty incredible. And in doing this, he scanned the human brain and found that when he asked somebody who could see, or who was full-sighted, to imagine a green apple, one part of their brain lit up, and when he then showed them a green apple, a different part of their brain lit up. So the other thing that he found is that there is a specific part of our brain that focuses on imagination, which is different from sight. But the reason I bring him up is because the other thing his research found is that some people have amazing capacities for imagination that are visual, so they can really bring to mind images. Others maybe aren't so great at the visual imaginations, but can pull together musical compositions or sounds or smells in their brain. So we all have different capacities for it, which, you know, when you talk about the field of neurodiversity, I think is particularly fascinating. That was a bit of a tangent. Let me figure out where I am. So as wonderful as our imaginations are and the fact that they can do so much, we can do so much with them, we can't just sit around all day being imaginative. If we are going to create real tangible change, we have to take it one step further, which is creativity. So in a sense, creativity is applied imagination. It's the act of being imaginative and turning it into something that is tangible, kind of a finished product. So if you think about all the incredible things that exist because of human imagination and creativity, if you think about, you know, our systems of democracy or our systems of education, the way our cities are structured, our language, our art, our music, they're all the products of human creativity and imagination. The world as we know it, as we see it, is the accumulation of generation after generation after generation, the imagination and creativity designing it to leave an imprint as they see fit. And the world that our children will inherit will be the one that has been shaped by our imagination and our creativity, where some creatures on Earth, like a mountain goat, are kind of resigned to the circumstances they find themselves born into. You know, so if you're a mountain goat and you're stuck on the side of a mountain, your life is pretty much running up and down the side of mountains, avoiding being eaten and raising your young. But human beings have the ability through our imaginations and through creativity to lift ourselves out of the circumstances. I don't mean that in the sense that absolutely every human being on Earth does, because there are people in circumstances that are, you know, incredibly difficult, if impossible, to move their way out of without external help. But as a species, we have the ability to take flight, even though we don't have wings. We have the ability to communicate with people on the other side of the world. And because of this, we may be physically evolving at the same rate as the rest of life on Earth, but actually in a cultural set, we're light years ahead of everybody else because we have these incredible powers of imagination and creativity. So before I move on, I thought I'd go through how we as an organization define creativity, which I have here. Oh, no, that was the last one. Here. So our definition of creativity is this. It is creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. And this came out of a report that SKR was involved with in the 90s that I think particularly if you're in the UK, that you possibly remember back from the 90s, the late 90s, called All Our Futures, which was commissioned at the time by the Labour government. And Penny, you're holding it up. Thank you. There it is. I usually have mine right next to me. So the Labour government commissioned it at the time. They put together this creative commission to put together a advice on creativity in the arts across education sectors. And I think what they were expecting at the time was sort of like a creativity hour. So on a Friday, everybody is creative for a bit and then goes on their way. And what they got back was this massive book of an entire systemic overhaul. So it got swept a bit under the rug by the government, but the impact it had was incredible for the art sector in particular, and the education sectors here in the UK, and then in other countries as well. So the committee came up with this definition of creativity. It's been adapted slightly over the years, but I thought I'd talk through, there are 3 aspects of this definition that are important to note. The first, let me see, is that it is a process, which means that there are 2 different aspects that are in conversation with each other to create the final product. So in this case, in the case of the creative process, it's the process of creating ideas and then evaluating ideas. And that goes back and forth throughout the entire time. So you create an idea, you evaluate it, you maybe tweak it or you chuck it in the bin, you come up with a new idea, you evaluate that, you build on it, and so on and so forth. So it's a process. The second word to highlight is the original. So creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. There are 3 different ways within this that original has significance. So the first is that it could be original to you as an artist or as a creator. The second is that it could be original to you and your peers. And the third is that it could be original to the whole of humanity. So it doesn't have to, the point is it doesn't have to be original to the entire of humanity. It can just be an idea that you've never had before. And then the third is value. So creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. And value kind of raises a big contention in this context, because people often ask quite rightly, how do you judge value? In this context, the way value is judged is the purpose in which you're doing something. So if you were an architect designing a building, it could be absolutely beautiful and it has aesthetic value and it's gorgeous. But if the second you open the door, the building collapses, it's not an idea that had value in the context of whether or not you were building a functioning building. So creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. And there are a few myths that hang around creativity a lot that get in the way of us reaching our full creative capacities. So the first is that only certain people are creative, that you are a creative person or you're not a creative person, which we see all the time in businesses in particular, that you have the creatives and the non-creatives. At schools, you have the kids who are deemed to be more creative and those who are deemed to be more academic. The second myth is so first of all, it's a myth. You can be creative. Absolutely everybody is born with creative capacities. The second is that only certain subjects or activities can be creative, which we again see a lot, particularly in education. So you have the arts and dance and music and possibly culinary, cuisine and things that are deemed to be the creative subjects at school. And then you have the non-creative ones, the kind of more serious ones, the science and the maths and the history and the geographies, which again is a total myth. So you can be creative in absolutely everything that you do. And then the third is that there's nothing you can do about it. You are creative or you're not creative, and that's kind of your lot. Which brings me to a quote from, I had a slide about this. I didn't realize that. Hang on. There we go. So a quote from Maya Angelou, because you can also imagine when you think of like the greats, the creatives, that they go for a walk and kind of come back and they've written Paradise Lost in their head, or, they just sort of sneeze a concerto. But I love this quote from Maya Angelou, that it takes me forever to get it to sing. I work at the language, which I think is brilliant because it really sums up everything, that it's a process, that it doesn't necessarily come naturally. And so many people decide that they're not creative or get discouraged from thinking that they're creative because they don't realize that if something doesn't come out perfect on the first attempt, that it's still a work in progress. They think, well, that's it, I can't do it. Whereas to hear somebody like Maya Angelou say that she works and works and works to get to the final product kind of sums it up. The other ability that we as humans have, which other creatures definitely have, but which is truly magnified by our creative capacities, is our ability to collaborate. And I love this quote from SKR, which is, creativity is call and response. One idea can catalyze a multitude more in the minds of other people. When Gutenberg was creating the printing press, he had no idea that it would lead to the Protestant Reformation. When Steve Jobs in the early 2000s was putting together the iPhone, he had no idea that just the way that it would change our lives. He kind of came up with the rough idea for apps, but he had no idea that apps would change absolutely everything: how we communicate with each other, how we eat, how we monitor our health. Absolutely everything. Another example is Alfred Binet, who came up with the IQ test in the turn of the 20th century, who at the time was doing it as a diagnostic to see which children that he was working with potentially needed help in certain areas. He had no idea that 100 years later IQ would be synonymous with intelligence. It wasn't designed to be. And even worse than that, there's no way that he could have anticipated that it would have got taken over, adopted by the Third Reich and used in the eugenics movement. Which leads me to the fact that there is a dark side to our creative capacities. And it's easy to think that creativity is all rainbows and paintings and wonderful Sundays. But actually, if you look at everything I mentioned, from our education systems to democracy, to our works of art, to our languages, just all aspects of it, we've also then created democracies that don't represent every person, and education systems that leave billions of children behind, and languages that we use to insult each other, and wars. We're at a point where our creativity has brought us to a critical pass. We've used it to create systems of agriculture that were destroying the planet, systems of transport that are destroying the planet. We've waged wars all over the world. And I think what it proves is that so many of the systems that we've created that have got us to where we are now no longer serving us. They've become obsolete. The wonderful thing about human systems is that by design, they can be changed by humans. It doesn't mean that it's easy, otherwise it'll be changing and flip-flopping back and forth all the time. But the very definition of a human-created system is that human beings can change them. If we create the world out of our minds, we have the ability to recreate the world, which I think is one of the most empowering things that we can think of. And there's a beautiful quote by Ursula Le Guin, which is, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings." And as I say, it takes a lot. It takes process, and it takes us working together, but it is well within our powers to do it. So you may think, if our creative capacities have brought us to this point where we're suddenly at a critical pass, does that just mean that we should stop being creative, that we should kind of knuckle down and get back to basics and continue to systemically suppress this superpower that we have? As SKR said, the more complex the world becomes, the more creative we need to be to meet its challenges. And we certainly are at a point in our history where the challenges that we are facing are incredibly complex. And so the argument absolutely is for more creativity, not less, for more engagement and not less. We believe that there are two climate crises. So there's obviously the climate of the Earth's resources, that we are systematically stripping the Earth of all of its natural resources and therefore jeopardizing our place on this planet. The second is a crisis of human resources, that at the same rate we are stripping each and every one of us of the richness of the diversity of our talents and passions that makes us unique and that keeps our ecosystems thriving. So the big question then is, what do we do about it? I believe the answer is, these are the two climate crises, sorry. Oh, and there's that quote, "The more complex the world becomes, the more creative we need to be to meet its challenges." 1 second. So I believe that we need to focus on the soil. And what I mean by that, and this is something that SKR used to say a lot, but the great farmers know that they don't grow plants. They don't stick a stem in the ground and then super glue on petals and sprinkle it with pollen and invite bees around to pollinate it. Great farmers know that they plant a seed and they focus on creating the conditions in the soil for the plant to grow itself. In the same way, we know that if you're a parent or you've been around children, you know that you don't grow a child. If you were pregnant and you raised you grew your child in your body, even then you weren't actively involved in knitting together the neurological system or the spinal cord. You created the conditions for your body and the baby's body to do that. In the same way, once they're grown, you know that you're not actively involved in stretching all the muscles and growing all the hair. You create the conditions, you help them get the right sleep and eat the right food and do the right activities that create the optimal conditions for them to grow themselves. The beautiful thing about human beings, as I said, is that we're born with these incredible capacities for imagination and creativity. So it's not like the answer that we're looking for here is that we all need to grow an extra leg. The answer is actually that we need to encourage us all to make the most of the talents and the abilities that we already have. I believe that we do this by creating the conditions for our ecosystems to thrive. So there are lessons that we can learn from how we're approaching the climate crisis, the environmental climate crisis. If you think about the way that they're all around the world, they're actively engaging in rewilding projects, which is where you take a little bit of land and you make sure that the ecosystem has what it needs to thrive, and then you just step away and let it take care of itself, because nature always finds a way. Life always finds a way in nature. And every little bit in an ecosystem, from the tiniest little creature right the way up to the biggest, has a purpose and a job. And if one of them isn't taken care of, then the entire ecosystem falters. Human ecosystems are exactly the same. Our cultures depend on each of us having, it depends on a variety of skills and talents and jobs and roles for each of us to make the systems that we've created and the systems that we will create tick along. I'd like to share with you a quote from one of my dad's last talks. So it's unlikely that you will have heard this one because he did it just very shortly before he died. But I think it's worth sharing because, well, you'll see. He said, "The birth of every child is a miracle. It's true. Life is a miracle. And how we come here, how we develop, is miraculous. But to say it's a miracle implies that it's a rare, a very occasional thing. But in human communities, in the natural world, it's not only everyday, it's essential to our flourishing. And that's our role as educators. Our role is to create those conditions. And when we do, we discover that all along we've been in the miracle business. And it's honestly the only business to be in." Which I really love. One of his things that he said all the time is that we have to create the conditions. Our role is to create the conditions for miracles. So if human ecosystems depend on diversity, the wonderful thing is that schools are rich ground for diversity. So if we look at a healthy, thriving school ecosystem, what does it include? Okay, I'm going to hit you with a bunch of bullet points. Stick with me. The first is that it values, well, actually, the first, there's no order to these, it's just, this is the first. It values its teachers. It remembers that they're human beings, that they have their own lives and their own circumstances, that they're not production workers. It respects their professionalism, because I don't think in any other sector the level of micromanagement that most teachers are subjected to would be put up with at all. It provides opportunities for continuous professional development. At the heart of a school is the relationship between students and teachers. And so for a healthy school, for a healthy ecosystem, that dynamic has to be intact. And you do that by nurturing and respecting your teachers. The second is that a healthy school system is interdisciplinary. And this is a big one, because when you look at subjects, you assume that classes can be separated by topic alone. You know, if you think about the sciences and the arts, for example, the sciences are completely different from the arts and require a totally different set of skills. You know, the sciences are all about hard facts and the arts are all about soft feelings, and they have no way of interacting with each other. But of course, it's total nonsense, because the arts, you know, depend on a huge amount of fundamental rigor, and the sciences, every great scientific discovery ever has been led from imagination and creativity. If you ask any scientist, they'll tell you the same thing. The wonderful thing then when you move into disciplines, which is much more like in the real world, because it's not, you know, if you were a journalist, for example, you're not going to, you don't just do one thing. If you're writing an article, you have to know how to write, you have to know how to research, you have to know how to edit and speak and know the topic you're talking about. It's all interdisciplinary, which is a beautiful thing that when you focus on disciplines opens up the capacity to be interdisciplinary across the school. The third is that it mixes age groups, which if we look at children, if you have children, you know that whilst we all, you know, the majority of children will reach certain milestones at certain points, you know that children develop fundamentally at their own pace. And some kids who are behind in other areas may be much further ahead in different ones. When you mix age groups together, you create opportunities for older children to teach the younger children, then also cement their own knowledge, for younger children to look up to their peers. And you also then break down that barrier, which I came back to at the beginning about valuing teachers, between teachers being able to learn from students as well as students being able to learn from teachers. So you kind of meet on this equal playing field, which is, and again, mirrors real life, because you don't keep 6-year-olds away from 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds in the real world. It mixes age groups. It personalizes learning, which is a big point of contention, obviously. There are multiple arguments against personalized learning. One is that, it's too expensive, it's not feasible. The first thing to say is that learning is personal, so any attempts to make it not personal are futile, because for learning to happen, it's a very personal activity. You can't make a child learn any more than you can make them grow an extra foot. The child has to be invested in the process. So regardless of whether or not we acknowledge it, learning is highly personal. The second is that it's an investment, not a cost. And if you look at all the tremendous rates of money that goes into projects for children or students and young people who have, for various reasons, been excluded from traditional systems, they all embody all of these factors anyway. Many of them are cross-age, many of them are multidisciplinary. They all personalize learning and make it about the particular student. And if you think about the amount of money that goes into those systems, if that were to go into the actual system, there wouldn't be as much of a need for the others. And then the third aspect of that is that it is absolutely possible. It may not have been possible 10 or 20 years ago, or not as easy 10 or 20 years ago, but we take it for granted that every aspect from our shoes to our coffees is able to be personalized. And when it comes to the accessibility that most of us have through technology, it's incredible. There's so many options when it comes to personalizing learning, and actually things like 100 showcase them spectacularly. So those are the first 4. Its schedule is flexible. So if you were to think of your life as an adult or a young person, or your professional career, if you were ever asked every 40 minutes to stop what you were doing because a bell rang, get up, move to another room, sit down with a whole new group of people and focus on something completely different, you'd go steadily crazy, and you'd certainly wouldn't achieve anything. The fact that we do this in most schools is totally counterintuitive. It makes perfect sense from an admin point of view, but very little sense from an actual learning perspective. And different activities take different lengths. So you might need a full hour to conduct a writing project. You may only need 20 minutes for an experiment. So a healthy school system looks at actually what's involved and what's being done, and adjusts the schedule to the actual real people who are attempting the tasks. It keeps assessment in perspective, which again is another huge contention. There are two aspects when it comes to assessment. The first is description. So if you say a child can swim 20 lengths, that's a description of what they can do. If you say the child is the fastest swimmer in their age range, then that's you making an assessment of them. And it's a pivotal point when it comes to education, to making sure that we're checking in and that people are learning or are engaged at the level that we would hope they would be, and to cater to them if they're not, or if they're further ahead. The issue with assessment, of course, is that it's become totally synonymous with these high stakes standardized tests. But when it's incorporated properly into the everyday process, and there are different methods implemented, from informal to formal to participation to portfolios and essays, there's no way to, I believe it's an integral part to education. It makes meaningful connections, and Yakov, this is something that your organization, Education Cities, does so spectacularly. But it makes connections not only with the local area and with the local businesses, but with the parents and the carers and everybody else who is involved in the fabric of the school. And when that happens, you find that local businesses and the communities are suddenly invested in what happens in the schools, and the children and young people are suddenly invested citizens in their local communities. So it seems totally bizarre when you look at it actually from the face of it, that we kind of put these high walls up around schools and separate them out, only to kind of release children into the wild once they get to 18. And then the last two is that it considers its physical environment, which is a huge one. I don't know how many of you have come across Professor Stephen Heppel, but he's fantastic. He does a lot of work in this area. He's created a lanometer, which is this little machine that you put on the desk, and it reads the light quality and the sound quality, the UV quality, I think, and all these different aspects, the heat, to see if the area, if the room is conducive for learning to happen. Because so often we sort of put kids in these environments on uncomfortable seats in these cold spaces that are really dark, and then wonder why it is that they can't pay attention. So in exploring the actual physical environment that you have, you then have opportunities to give children options, because maybe they want to come in and sit one day on the floor, maybe they want to get up and move around for the next day. So making sure there's enough light, that there's enough air, that there's plenty of access to the outdoors. So a healthy school considers its physical environment. And the last is that it values the vision of its participants. And this is where schools like Summerhill and the democratic education movement in general is doing such a sensational job. Young people are the entire reason that the system operates. The only reason everybody shows up to school every day is because there are these generations of young people. So the fact that so often their voices are systematically suppressed is shocking, really, when you think about it. And we do such a brilliant job of telling children that their voices don't matter for the first 18 years, and then wondering why they can't become engaged democratic citizens when they hit voting age. So providing opportunities to let children be involved in the decision making that happens at schools and really listening to their voices is pivotal to a healthy school ecosystem. So that was a lot of very small information over a very quick amount of time. But I guess the last thing to say is, where does it start? And it starts, as it must do, with you and with each of us. It starts with anybody who's a stakeholder in education. And when it comes down to it, there isn't a single person on earth who isn't a stakeholder in education, whether you're actively involved in education as a student or a teacher or a school leader or a parent, or whether you're a business owner or just any person walking down the street. What happens in schools and then what happens fundamentally in societies is of the greatest importance to absolutely everybody walking around the planet. So I firmly believe that we are all stakeholders in education. There is a quote, which I'm attesting here to Benjamin Franklin, and I say that with hesitance because I confidently put it in a book that I have just written, and my copy editor came back and said that there's no evidence that he ever said this. However, I proceed, and I think if he didn't, then he should have. So apparently, he said that there are 3 types of people in this world: those who are immovable, those who are movable, and those who move. And I think when it boils down to it, the best advice is that those who are immovable, just let them get on with it, because tide and time are not on their side. The waves of change keep on moving and they'll get left behind in any case. It's a waste of breath. There are those who are movable, who maybe don't know enough about a certain subject or a certain issue, who would be passionate supporters if they were to find out about it. And those are the people to talk about and to raise your voices to. And then there are those who move, which I imagine are many of the people here in this room, the movers and shakers who dedicate each and every one of their days, to creating the changes that we're talking about, to creating a better future for us all, to making sure that each child has access to the best form of education, depending on who they are and where they are and what their circumstances are. One of my dad's favorite quotes, it wasn't he said it, one of my favorite of his quotes is that he'd say that rock and roll was not a government-led initiative, that change happens from the ground up. It doesn't happen in legislature and in the locked doors that most of us never get to go behind. It happens from each and every one of us taking a stand and raising our voice. And it comes back, I think, to those 2 words that I started with, imagine if, and the endless possibilities that they open up for us. And if we all came together and joined, imagine if we created a better future for us all. So I will leave you with one last quote from Dad, SKR. He said, "Our best hope for the future is to develop a new understanding of human capacity to meet a new era of human existence." And I think there has never been a more important time that we joined together, and imagine if we did. So that's the end of me speaking at you. Thank you for listening. I think we probably have about 20 minutes left. Am I right, Henry? So I just thought I would love to hear from you guys if you have any questions, but also the work that you're doing and any thoughts and feedback. I'd just love to have a chat. So I guess unmute and shout or do that little handy raise thing. Oh, and I'll do this, hang on. There we go.
I will say, Kate, first of all, it was so strong and great. The last imagine if that I am looking for the next this year. I think it was really fantastic. And I use all your materials today when I make activities in different places in the world. I use your materials, and that's wonderful.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Yakov. I can't tell you what that means. We have the next festival, it will be the first week in March, again for Dad's birthday. And, drumroll please, but it's also the launch of the book. So I just finished writing Dad's last book.
That's what I was just going to ask you about, Kate. Can you tell us a little bit about it? You know, is it got a planned release date, or what? You know, what do we...
Unsurprisingly, it's called Imaginative, and it's being released on Dad's birthday on March the 4th. So for those of you that don't know, this was Dad's last book. He had been working on it himself, and we'd been working on it together. And then when he passed away, he asked that I finish writing it for him. So it's teeny tiny. It's 60 pages. But it's a manifesto of all of his core arguments and beliefs. A lot of what I talked about today will be in it, and it is out in March, which is amazing.
Amazing. Wow, really amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Another thing I was going to just quickly ask you about, Kate, is I know that obviously you're doing lots of work with promoting all of this as well, but is, you know, almost the work with school, are you actually sort of working with schools and sort of how to help make, because help make those changes, basically, you know, that these, because I think that a lot of what you're saying there at the end of the that now's the time. We've got, you know, people can be creative, people can be doing those things, but a lot of the time it feels that there's people are quite stuck in what they're actually able to do and how they're able to do it. Yeah. And I wonder if there's anything with you and your team of that you're working in these sort of situations.
But there is. Thank you for asking. So firstly, the book, it was one of the more negative feedbacks that Dad used to get, that he highlighted the problem but didn't come forward with tangible solutions, which was something that he took in his stride, but that sort of annoyed him because it was based on the 18-minute TED Talk rather than, you know, the 50-plus year career that was, you know, reports and advice and books and everything that addressed it. So I've incorporated that certainly in the book. I hope you'll find there's a lot of tangible advice and tips for how to get involved in the book. We are also working on a number of initiatives, which I can't say a huge amount about at the minute, but we'll be launching in March as well, which I hope will pull people together, as well as there'll be a platform with resources that goes along with the book. And now that the book's done, you know, because we were working with Dad for 5 years, but we did Imagine If in 4 months, and then I've spent the past several months writing the book. So it's only been a year, which is crazy. It sort of feels like it's been 2 weeks and a lifetime all bundled up into one experience. So yes, and I am going to take you up on that invitation to Summerhill for whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, now already we're starting to alleviate things a bit more, and you know, you're always welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, really, really, really would be lovely to have you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So has anybody else got any questions or anything they want to add or converse, anything really? Just
I want to continue to talk about the imagination at all, and say that to me the most important, not the most, it's very interesting because we don't imagine alone, we are imagining together. And what I found, that it's not easy to imagine together. It's much easier to imagine alone. But if you need to imagine together, you need to know one of the other world. If I want to imagine with you, I need to know your imagination world. And especially I need to know my limit of imagination. And I will say what is limit of imagination of all the people. For example, when we're talking about the future of education, we can think about the future of education next year. But we can think about what will be in 10 years. And we can talk about 15 years and 100 years. Or 1,000 years. So when someone talk about 100 years and another talk about next year, it's not going together. And this is make a very, very interesting combination. From time to time, I can kill other people by saying, "Oh, he's stupid about what he's talking." It cannot work in my school, and my school become my limit, and that's to me something that's very, very interesting. It's the imagination with a group, with a team, not an imagination alone.
Yeah.
And are we focusing, and how we can understand one another in the world of imagination. And that's my small
No, you're absolutely right, Yaakov. And I think it comes down to, and again, one of those myths around creativity and imagination being that it's all about letting go and sort of being free and having, no boundaries. And when actually it's quite the opposite, that the best imaginative and creative work happens within the confines of kind of agreed boundaries. So, and I think it's really important when you're having those conversations to identify the parameters of what it is that you're talking about. For example, one of the ones that I find really interesting is the way you say, about it could be about my school or the world or 10 or 20 years. I think also when we talk about why we're doing it, we never sort of take stock to talk about the purpose of education. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's lots of conversations happening about it, but I think we often take it for granted that everybody assumes we're talking about the same thing, whereas when you look at different cultures, if you look at, say, places like Finland and Korea and Canada, they talk about education being to create well-rounded citizens who are in touch with themselves and their communities. When you talk about countries like America and the UK, they're talking about raising young people who can go and become effective members of the labor force. It's for economic reasons. And actually, if you're looking at education from the perspective of economic reasons, you can understand that you'd want a sort of standardized group of workers who don't question too many things. But when you're talking about it from the context of a well-rounded individual who's in touch with themselves and their wider community, you actually want them to be in touch with themselves and the wider community, and how you educate them is differently. And I think often you have these conversations with people, to your point, imagining the future of education, assuming we're talking about the same outcome, that we all want the same thing from it. And then you're starting off at different starting lines. So when the pistol goes off, you're sort of running in other directions, wondering why the other person doesn't understand what you're saying. So you're absolutely right. Setting parameters when we're imagining is crucial to doing it effectively.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. Oh, Penny, your hand is up. Sorry, I didn't see.
No, that's fine. I just put it up. So Kate, so many things to say to you, but just quickly now, first of all, your dad would be so proud of you. You speak so beautifully, not only about his legacy, but also your own ideas. And I think that's fantastic. Could you, I mean, I might be putting you on the spot here, and so forgive me, but, you're a mother, and I'm a mother of a 20-year-old, you're a mother of a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether, in terms of the education system, especially in England, and especially in response to the kind of climate emergency, what's your take on this as a mother in terms of things that need to be changed quickly?
Outside of the blind panic that keeps me up at 3 a.m, presumably.
Exactly. I have to say, Kate, I have to say.
We've just put Adeline and our daughter in nursery, and it was and speak for the devil, she's just woken up. But we had her. I'm not ignoring her, by the way. My husband has gone to check on her, just in case you thought I was being negligent here. It takes a village. So we've just put her in nursery, and it was the thought that kept me up at nights was, how on earth do I put her into the system? I think I cried for 24 hours before her first day, thinking it's the last day she's untouched. Even if we take her out the system later on, she will forever be touched in some capacity by formal education. I always assumed that I would unschool or homeschool. And then I guess you realize when you become a parent that you have, no say in who your child turns out to be fundamentally at their core. And she's the most social kid on the planet who's been asking to go to school since she was about 2. So I kind of swallowed all my instincts, and we found a really lovely school, don't get me wrong, and I will watch them like a hawk. But in terms of the climate, it's a terrifying one, because I think what I said is true, which is why I said it about, revolutions don't happen. They're not government-led. Rock and roll wasn't a government-led initiative. They happen from the ground up. But when you talk about something like the ticking clock that is the climate crisis, you really need systemic change to happen much quicker than it is happening. And I think when it comes to, in terms of parenting and school and the climate crisis, it boils down to, I guess, hoping for the best and expecting the worst, and trying to raise her with everything that she has, so that she knows why we make certain choices, why we buy certain things, we don't buy other things, why we behave in certain ways, and campaigning like hell to get the school to get on side with it as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and let's have another conversation about it as well.
No, it's utterly terrifying as a parent, and I actually know lots of people, of my peer group who are choosing not to have kids for that reason, who just think it's irresponsible to bring a child into the world when you're not sure they're going to have a future. And that is the thought that keeps me up at 3 a.m. is, what have we done? But having done it, we'll fight tooth and nail to make sure they have a future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. What time is it? Oh, and Chad, your hand's up. I think we have 5 more minutes. But you're on mute, Chad.
Yep. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
I was looking so many different platforms. I was looking for the button. Kate, I'm in the United States, and I'm in Arkansas. I'm in Arkansas. And today I saw you tweeted that you were about to do this.
Yeah.
And I wrecked the rest of my day to race and find the opportunity, just hoping that I might get a chance to say thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a little emotional about it because your dad has helped me find my purpose.
Incredible.
And the fact that you're going to keep it going, and you have this same wit, you have the same sense of humor that made him so endearing. And I just can't believe that I just got to hop on here in the middle of my dad just like wrecked everything and hopped on, was able to just personally tell you that. And now that I'm kind of collected, I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate everything that your dad did. And as a dad of a young daughters, I know how proud he would be. But just kudos, and keep up the good work. And if I get another chance, you're going to be speaking in somewhere next week that I'm going to attend. I'm going to be there as well. And I'm trying to really be a part of that community, and really work, because this is my new life's passion, is to make sure that these things are heard, and that these things are being talked about in real ways. And your dad made this conversation easier for people to have. And you have that same eloquence and that same passion. And so I don't want to take time for anyone else that wants to say hi, but I just wanted to say thank you. And what a pleasure it is to hear you speak. And I look forward to whatever else comes. And if you ever need anybody to ring the bell or sing the song or do the dance, you just let me know, and I'd be happy to help in any way. So
thank you so much. I can't tell you how much that means. Thank you. There are, I guess, a few things to say. The aside from thank you for wrecking your entire day to come and say hi. The one of the things I did, actually, I think it was after I did the 100 tribute last year. Someone sent me a message saying that they thought because Dad had died that the movement would stop. And I just thought how horrified he'd be at that, because he would have said that he wasn't the only voice in it. I mean, look at everybody here, and all the work that Jakob, you're doing, and that Summerhill's doing, that IDEC is doing, Jerry, that you're doing with Aero, and the millions of more, that he was one voice in a chorus of people saying it. And and continuing his legacy, I realized 2 things. One was that that I wasn't doing it alone, that I didn't have to do it, because he inspired people like you, Chad, who were carrying it on anyway. And 2, then if I was going to do it, I better not screw it up, because he's not here to keep me on track with it. So I can't. So anyway, so all that to say, I'm absolutely determined to. I promised him that I'd dedicate the rest of my life to it, and I will. And your daughters are incredibly lucky to have you fighting the fight as well. So what is your passion, Chad, or your purpose? Is it this, or is it something else?
Well, I'm called as an innovation specialist, and I work in
Very cool.
schools, and it started all with technology and the integration of technology into schools. But what I've realized through all of this is my whole purpose for using technology was to change school.
Right.
This is the real purpose. The real purpose is this: technology is the tool, right? And so what I've just am reshaping and acclimating my mission forward to making sure that the change is not just about technology or whatever. It's about the whole philosophy and what's best for our kids and what our kids would want, what we would want our kids to be a part of. And how, for your kids, my kids are about done, but your kids and the others to come, we have a great opportunity to make this better. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm doing whatever I can to just find ways to share this message and to make this happen, because I just believe in it. And so yeah, that's literally what I'm doing. I'm just like refocusing I'm self-employed and I'm a consultant to schools. And so I'm just kind of saying, look, if you want me, you're going to have to change everything. And I'm willing to help and do whatever I can to give you help. So that's what I do to them now. So thank you for asking, but it's a great motivator.
Oh, incredible. We should find a way to talk afterwards as well.
Okay.
I'd love to learn more about it.
For sure. Thank you.
Andrea, your hand is up, and I think this is probably the last one we have time for, because it said to finish 5 minutes early, right, Henry? Yes. Okay, Andrea.
Hi. Thank you for this session. I just wanted to share one picture that formed in my head while I was listening to one of your dad's talks. I don't know which one it was, but it was like, what if we would all live in a world where every person found their element or is about to find it? And it's, I don't know, for me, it's the one that's like, I don't know how the companies have this goal that they chase after. It's not necessarily reachable tomorrow or in 10 years, but it's like the most awesome thing I can think of to live in such a world. And this is what I try to do with my students, right? I tell them about the element. I tell them about some of the stories he told about people and how unusual it can be, or how, yeah. So it's, what if we would live in a world where everybody is in their element?
Be pretty incredible, huh? What age do you teach?
So right now my kids are from 10 to 15, I think.
It's a great age.
Yeah.
It's a great age for that as well, for figuring it out, and figuring out multiple things as well that they're interested in. Yeah. It's one of the things actually in the book that I wrote about, or that we wrote about, that that thing that we're all stakeholders in education. That if you're an individual, if you're not formally part of education in any capacity, that one of the best things you can do to help is to dedicate time to yourself to figure out what your element is, because then you're contributing in the best way that you possibly can, and also then you've got scope to become a mentor and to help other people find theirs, which it sounds exactly like what you're doing. Yeah. And
also one thing I try to do is, when I see people from where I think they are in their elements, or where I see passion and I see motivation and I see talent, I try to do field trips to their job with the kids so that they can see it in action. They can see the spark, they can see the flow, everything. So just to get close to the concept, and it moves them every time, even though it's not theirs. Just to be there in that space, it's priceless.
That's fantastic. Amazing. It's contagious to some extent, isn't it, when you see somebody doing something that they really love? And that's my imaginative statement, for what it's worth. Mine was, imagine if we created systems that lifted each of us up rather than systematically bringing each of us down. Imagine if we took the time to truly help each of us figure out who we are at our core. When we were talking about the purpose of education before, and Dad always talked about how we don't live in one world, we live in two. So the first is the world that's within us, your internal world that exists only because you do, and the second is the world that's around you, the physical world that's there whether or not you exist. And he always felt that education, the core purpose of education, is to help children understand the world, the two worlds, the world that's within them and the world that's around them, and the link between the two. And I think a big part of that is finding your passion, because it's not, it's not just sort of a fun thing to do so you feel happy at the end of the day. It's because that's, that is also the best way to contribute to society as well. Amazing. Henry, I think it said to finish 5 minutes early, and it's 21:25 on my time. Penny, thank you for staying up.
Oh, it's so lovely to see you.
And thank you all so much for coming and for contributing. And I hope you'll come as well to the Imaginative Festival, which is happening in March next year.